Our first story this morning is from Wellington City Council. We're very happy to have Wellington's Chief Resilience Officer, Mike Mendonça, and his team sharing experiences of how GIS helped them in their response in the November earthquake based in Kaikoura. Please welcome Mike Mendonça.
Thanks, Dave. Cheers, mate. Well, thanks, everybody. Look, a couple of months ago, I got asked to speak at the annual conference of the New Zealand Society for Earthquake Engineers. One of the things the engineers were struggling with was why nobody would listen to their technical advice. I caused a wee bit of a stir by telling them that they were terrible storytellers. That's why nobody was listening. Fantastic technical data, technical reports, but no story. So if I'm honest with you, I was going to use the same notes for that speech today, but having sat here this morning listening to those fantastic stories, I've had to throw those away. Because it strikes me that this is more about, not so much about cartography, which is what I had thought, but more about storytelling, or at least where storytelling meets cartography. So I just think it's fantastic. And if you think about what Governor O'Malley was telling us this morning, he wasn't actually giving us a presentation. He was giving us a series of anecdotes and vignettes. He was telling us stories backed up by good GIS that were really compelling. And for me, that is a future for Wellington City in this space. And you know, all cities have fantastic stories to tell. And the reason I've got these taniwha up here is Wellington's story starts, if you go back far enough, with a couple of taniwha that actually made the city in the first place. So storytelling really resonates with cities like ours, and we'd like to share with you our story from what happened in November last year around the Kaikoura earthquake, and actually what we've learnt and how we're going to use that information to do stuff in the future. So it's just not so much about the science of where, but also the science of what. So to help me do that, I'd like to introduce Derek Baxter and Alex Robertson, who are going to take you through what we've learnt. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks, Mike. What we're going to start with today is a video that we had made, or not we had made, that Canterbury University made and published on what actually happened in the Kaikoura earthquake, the shockwaves moving up the country. There's a lot of information playing out on this little animation. So in the corner, I draw your attention to the buildings and looking at how they start to move as the shockwaves go. What happened was, about 60 seconds or so after the first rupture at Kaikoura, we started to feel shockwaves in Wellington. You'll see there on the graph, the shockwaves actually intensified as they moved up the various fault lines up the coast, and about now you'll start to see those buildings start to move. Those buildings are not any particular building, they're just some hypothetical models, and that we're working on around some other technology we're going to play with a bit later on. The other thing to take away from that video, though, is we dodged a bullet. Notice how the shockwaves continued up the fault line off out to the coast and not directly at Wellington City. So it's been a big wake-up call for us and some big changes around how we use our technology and our information into the future. We did have some damaged buildings, and Alex is going to show you how we dealt with that first at the time.
Thanks, Max. So what we can see on here, this is one of the tools which we used during the emergency up in EOC. We had this typical stuff you'd get, such as your 2D maps and everything, but it became quite clear quite early on that we needed to be able to actually tell a story of what was happening so that people who weren't comfortable always with using maps could actually see the information and work with it. What we did was we pushed up things into web scenes from ArcGIS Pro, and it enabled us just to show areas where we had key buildings of interest. In this case, this is 61 Molzer Street up in the Thorndon area, where there was damage, and show the coordinates in different areas. This is a really powerful way of doing it, and we did this for most of the buildings which we at the time were aware of in the city which were affected, and we can see those at the bottom, different areas we could just jump to when we needed to. This was a really powerful way and a very simple way of just getting the message across. One of the interesting things that happened when we put this onto a big screen in the OC is that meetings stopped being behind closed doors and often happened in front of the big screens more out, because this information was really just talking to people.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Look, so one of the next things I want to be able to explain to you is one of the challenges we faced was why were different buildings damaged in different ways? And one of the big things I had to face, and my colleagues in front of the media, was for those of you that have been to Wellington, we've got lots of old historic buildings that we've always said, be careful, they're earthquake prone. We don't want to have what happened in Christchurch where bits of the building fell down on people. Wellington's event was different. We had modern buildings that were significantly damaged, and trying to explain that was really quite difficult. So this isn't a mapping video, but it does explain very clearly what happened. If we can cue the next video.
This is basically a structural engineering toy built with the intent of showing how buildings behave in earthquakes. And so we have the three models here, if you like. This one representing a short, stiff building, and obviously taller, medium-rise, high-rise building, a lot more flexible. Now what happens when an earthquake hits is the ground starts moving and you'll get different forms of shaking. If you get very short, sharp shaking, you'll find that the small buildings are affected. And on the other hand, if you get very long, slow shaking, you'll find the tall buildings are affected. Or, fairly obviously, something in the middle, and you'll get those buildings going. Now what's interesting about the Kaikoura earthquake, in Wellington at least, is that it basically got these middle-sized buildings going. And that's why we've seen damage in some medium-sized buildings, but not, as many people expected, in the earthquake-prone buildings.
Okay, so Governor O'Malley, I think, so far wins the competition for the oldest slide from ArcGIS. We're now going to put our entry in. So I have... I present to you paper 1.0 and highlighter 3.7. Now what this map is this was how, needs must and practical things need to happen. What we did here and what we're showing on this map is not the state of the buildings, but the major CBD buildings and the engineering company that checked it. And the best way for us to manage that, because we had about 23, 25 engineering companies all working, not connected with us, not working for Wellington City, not controlled by us, we just crossed off the buildings once we'd had engineers check the building. So all we're recording on this is 2 bits of information. Here's the building and who's the firm that checked it. We can put that one down. Guys, I challenge anyone else over the weekend, the rest of the couple of days, to try and something older than that. Alex is now going to take us to, so how did we convert that into a story map, and what did we do with it to make it more interrogable? So when Alex...
So for those people who are familiar with using georeferencing in GIS, that's the first way we approached this. It was basically georeferencing from hell. The paper didn't line up. Everything was kind of difficult to do. And then about halfway through, we found out it needed to still be updated, and people were coming along when we weren't around and coloring in a new square, which meant we had to start again. This was a bit of a big problem after you spent a few days trying to get this thing to work. So to solve this problem, we actually moved over to using a geoform. This enabled the same staff who were coloring in that to also put a record in with all the information which they needed to record. And then from that, they could also select a location and put attachments in. This fed through to ArcGIS Online, which I had hooked into ArcGIS Desktop at the time, and I could suck this information through into the desktop, run a bit of model builder, and then it would appear on an online map, which is that one there.
And one of the things, using that story map, we were also able to push out a public information map as part of a wider earthquake response. We don't have time to work through that now, but it's the same information, just with some filters put on, so that instead of the interrogable data that we currently have on this story map, the stuff that was on the public facing was just, here's a location, here's the star of a building getting checked and doing some other things. Look, that's kind of earthquake response. However, the real power that we're using the tools now for is about understanding how we might use the information that we've gained to better plan for our city and better work through some of the things that are going on. So we're going to show a couple of 3D videos. How many people from here are from Wellington? There's a few of you. Cool. The first thing you'll all want to do is look for where's my house, and we've heard that theme, so we're not going to have time to run it slow enough to see there. But one of the challenges we had in the post-quake response was a lot of accusation that it was all about the reclaimed land. For those of you who've been to Wellington, you walk down the street and you can see the shoreline, where the shoreline used to be. We had a lot of buildings that were damaged that weren't right down on the shoreline. We come up with this hypothesis. This work had been done by GNS before. It's available on GNS's website. It's a 200-page scientific report written by about 3 PhDs. And what this is using 3D modelling to explain some really complex things. The buildings are floating at what is the natural ground level, and what we're shading underneath that is the depth to bedrock underlying the city. There's the beginnings of a hypothesis that the slope and shape of the underlying ground changes the earthquake shock waves, and as a result we get some more damage. As you can see there, we've got some damaged buildings. Those ones that are hovering are ones we know were damaged. Right on some interesting slope changes, and certainly right on some very deep depth to bedrock issues there. This is very emerging technology. As I said, if you jump onto GNS's website, you can download the 200-page report, try and explain that, and what I've just done in 30 seconds is really, really difficult, but doing it using these tools is pretty amazing. This is not meant to be scary. We can engineer for all these things provided we have this information. So giving this information to our building designers and our geotech engineers means that they can plan for it better. If you can jump to the next video, please, guys. The next video, though, for those of you that are following the media at the moment, is we've got some interesting challenges with slope and slips at the moment. So this video is showing Wellington's steep terrain, and the big high bars are the known slips and where we can have some things, where we're having some problems. So what this allows us to do is better plan for where the roads might be damaged in the event of not just an earthquake, but a major flooding event or a major rainstorm. And so the gradients there, the purple from is pretty okay through to the bright yellows is where we think we're going to have some problems. Would come as no surprise there, our big bars that have popped up are where we've kind of knew where things were likely to happen again. Again, not meant to be scary, just allows us to plan a little bit for the future.
So all the technology you've seen in these videos is ArcGIS Pro. It's given us a really, really powerful way of showing the message that we're trying to get across. A lot of this information we've had for years, and it's been quite complex information. The ability to put things into 3D has been really powerful. We can then tell the message to people who aren't experts in the field. We can show where it is. And as was mentioned earlier today, is that one of the first questions is, where's my house? We get that pretty much every time we do this, and it's a really, really good way of just communicating with people and making it more of a personal kind of experience for them. ArcGIS Pro has been a really powerful way to do this, and yeah, I can imagine we're just scratching the surface on it.
Okay, cool. The next step that we then move to is how do we integrate a whole bunch of this information in a way that we can plan better and talk, particularly for my bosses, the councillors, about the kinds of things that are happening. So what we've done here is this is an internal story map that we've developed. The greens, reds and yellows are soil issues and shaking potential. The bright pinks around the edge are where under our district plan we've imposed a heritage overlay restricting the type of construction. So what we're able to do now is have a conversation with my councillors and go, if you want to have growth in our city, we've got a choice between where Mother Nature is restricting, here's the hazards that we know about, versus here's the areas where we are restricting via our district plan. So it's bringing together different parts in the silos that were talked about earlier in the day, where different parts of the city are often at healthy tension with each other. Wellington's got some lovely old buildings. We've got a heritage overlay protecting those buildings. It comes as no surprise that our forefathers, though, built on the good land that was known back in the 1930s. So that's kind of where we're using the systems now, both for internal and external use. Mike.
Right, thanks, Bex. Look, just in closing, I think the key question for us now is so what? And this is really important stuff. So can I give you an example? For Wellington, there's a part of Wellington that's called Lyell Bay, which is coastal, subject to tsunami, liquefaction, sea level rise. We know that when we have the big earthquake in Wellington, the movement of the Wellington fault line, that a lot of people will die, sadly, and that Lyell Bay will be badly affected by a tsunami. The deaths are in the hundreds. So when we start looking at this information and asking ourselves, why is that? And is there anything we can do about it? So we don't just assume that people die. And we start thinking about how we plan our city and the decisions that we take around the future of our city. So one of the basic things we can do is, okay, well, let's not have any more intensification of housing in Kilbirnie, because all we're going to do is make a tragedy for our grandchildren. So for us, this is about legacy, making sure we make the right calls for our decision and making sure that we are taking the tough calls and having the tough conversations. Not popular, but you've got to have cojones and you've got to kind of really stick to your guns when it comes to having these sorts of discussions, because people really hurt. So that's it from us. Just in closing, a couple of observations. One from me, I must remember next time I come to a tech conference not to wear a tie. I think I'm the only person. And the second thing I'd like to finish with is, don't you think that President O'Malley has a real ring to it? Thanks very much for your time. Cheers.
Thank you very much indeed to Wellington City Council. It was an awesome presentation. I guess it's a really good example again of how GIS can be used in various ways, in this case to understand and then to share and engage with people around that information.